Welcome! Hello everyone, my name is Matt. This is the Bad Vibes Club, and this is 10 Texts on Painting, a series where me and Andrea Frankie read texts about painting and think about what painting is and what painting does and all these different things. This episode, which is episode 8 of 10 Texts on Painting, is all about the end of painting, and it was recorded at City & Guilds Art School in London. Thanks to everyone at City & Guilds. We were invited to speak by Rose Fulbright, who's a student on the MA there. Thanks to all the other MA students who came along and contributed to the discussion, which we didn't record because we thought it was better just to have that chat freestyle and let it be what it was. Thanks to Charlie, who leads the course, for saying yes, let's get these guys in, and thanks to Jamie, who came to meet us and hosted us and contributed to the discussion, and we loved meeting you. It was really nice to hang out and chat all things painting. All right, so it's a live episode, so that's the vibe. You can hear us kind of grappling with that in the episode. We read a number of texts. The End of Painting, which is by Douglas Crimp, in October journal from 1981. And we kind of paired that very October journal, end of modernism stuff, with Helen Molesworth writing about Noah Davis, who is a much more contemporary painter. Noah Davis died in 2015, but he was very young, in his 30s when he died. And Helen Molesworth worked with him when he was alive on this project he had called the Underground Museum, and also curating a show of his paintings posthumously at David's Werner. And that show went on to the Barbican in London. And so thinking about what it means to talk about the end of painting, and thinking about painters, I guess, who have a different connection to painting and have different reasons for painting, and painting is doing a different thing than, you know, kind of advancing modernism or whatever. I guess that's the vibe of the episode. It's a good one. I felt a bit like, I don't know what I'm saying when we were in the event, but maybe that's the nature of doing a live podcast. On re-listening, I thought it was super interesting, and me and Andrea kind of get at some of the fundamental issues, I think, that we've been tackling over the series, about the difference between painting and other kinds of art. Maybe this question of the ontological nature of painting. Is it kind of more fundamental, or more fundamental relationship to gesture and touch and image making than other kinds of contemporary art? Oh, sorry, I didn't actually say what text we read by Molesworth. So we watched a video called Helen Molesworth Introduces Noah Davis from David's Werner Gallery. And that's an online video. It's about 45 minutes long, and it's her talking in quite a lot of detail about individual paintings. I thought that was great. We read Helen Molesworth, Noah Davis, An Introduction, which is an introduction from Noah Davis, the book, which is also published by David's Werner Books from 2020. Some Years Count as Double, which is her obituary of Noah Davis. You can read that online at Art Forum, but it's also in the book by Helen Molesworth. And a very short text which focuses on a single painting called 40 Acres and a Unicorn by Molesworth. That's the name of the text and the name of the painting. All right, so we also ended up talking about a number of other kind of things. Just a few notes here. I talk about this thing about painting seeing itself as the kind of top of the art pyramid, top of the fine arts. And I refer to this quote, "Sculpture is something you bump into when you back up to look at a painting," which is by Ad Reinhardt. But I can't remember at the time. I talk a bit about Douglas Crimp's other very famous essay, which comes from a show he curated called Pictures, which inaugurated the idea of the Pictures generation of American artists. And that is from October Journal as well. And you can find PDFs of that online, and you can find the original catalogue essay online as well. We talk about Helen Molesworth's podcasts on Noah Davis, so I'll include links to them. And Andrea refers to a Noah Davis lecture that she found online, so I'll put a link up to that as well. This is the last live one for a while. I think the last 2 episodes of the painting series we're going to do, as we have done before, just me and Andrea chatting face to face rather than facing out to an audience. But hope you've enjoyed these live episodes. They've been really fun to do, and we're keen to do more. I think we're going to go to Prague in December now, so that'll be the next series, and then maybe do some other ones. So if you've got an art school, if you've got a gallery, if you've got a museum, please get in touch if you want us to come and speak there. All right, anyway. Oh yeah, final thing to say, please like, subscribe, rate, comment on iTunes, YouTube Music, Spotify. We're actually on all the platforms now, which we weren't previous to this. Oh, we've also got an Instagram these days, which is 10_texts on Instagram. So follow that. That's going to be the kind of main location where I post stuff from now on about the podcast. All right. Enjoy this one. We enjoyed making it. Hope you enjoy listening. See you at the end. Bye. So The End of Painting by Douglas Crimp, which was in October magazine, and it was published in 81. Is that right? 1981. So that's like a big, what's the word, like polemic? Is that the phrase?
Yeah, I think it is a polemic.
It's like a polemic about contemporary art and painting and what it means to paint in the, I guess, 70s and 80s. And then the other things we're looking at are much more recent, and they're, I think I put these in one document. So they're Helen Molesworth texts and a video on the painter Noah Davis. Yeah, from this book.
And from this book.
And from that book. Which we will use this to show some paintings and stuff later. And these are not polemics. These are like, writings by a curator, like, a curator who first is a curator at a museum space and is then a curator at a... No, is that right?
Yeah, she works at MoCA, and then she works at she curates the exhibition at David's Werner.
Yeah. So they're about the artist, they're about the artwork, and they're about contemporary painting, right? Noah Davis died in... when did he die? 2015. Thanks, 2015. So this is like, what? Why is that's okay, isn't it?
That's okay.
I don't know him, personally. But this is contemporary painting. This is someone painting now. What does it mean to make paintings now? How are paintings kind of talked about now? And the video by Helen Molesworth, where she's going around the David Werner show of Noah Davis, that's the other thing that was on this reading list. And that I thought was really, really great for just seeing and hearing someone like really thinking through a painting. It was great. I just thought that was such a nice thing to watch. So these are very different kinds of texts or artifacts, and we're going to kind of use them to kind of read against each other, I suppose. That's the way of phrasing it. Yeah?
Yeah. And we decided we're not going to do this as a lecture. We're going to do it as a podcast again. Yeah. So we're less talking to you and we're more or less talking to each other.
Yeah.
But just because we love to have an argument with each other and disagree. So that's like an important part of the thing.
Andrea you love to have an argument with a straw man version of me that you've created in your mind. Which is a much more fun version of me to argue. Anyway. All right, so we're going to start with the Crimp. Let's go chronological.
Are we just sitting down now?
No, I just need to get my Zero up. So what was your first quote? You got the first line.
Yeah. Oh, because it says, Barbara Rose abandoned the pages of Vogue magazine in order to say something really serious about the art of our time. And I thought, first burn, because she was like, this essay is so bitchy, I have to say. Yeah. And then I was fascinated about why is this essay in October magazine so bitchy? And then there's like a whole, maybe so I'll give the context. Maybe I'll talk a bit about the context in which this is written, right? So this is quite a bitchy response to a Barbara Rose essay of an exhibition where Daniel Buren is in. Specifically focused on Daniel Buren's work. You're going to show Daniel Buren's work?
Oh, yeah, okay, I'll do that.
And he uses these examples as he goes of Frank Stella. And then I realized that Barbara Rose was married to Frank Stella. So this is like super personal. Douglas Crimp was sort of like besties with Daniel Buren, and Daniel Buren in 71 was part of this big show at the Guggenheim, and he had this big painting that was related to anti-Vietnam War protests, and the Guggenheim take this painting down the day before the opening. It was a big thing. And that's when Douglas Crimp meets Daniel Buren, and they become best friends. So for Crimp, who, after this, gets kicked out of October because he's into politics and he's bringing gay politics into the magazine, and he's really invested in political activism, he's having a response of Barbara Rose making this big attack at Daniel Buren, which is someone who has been attacked before because of his politics. So there's like a whole tension and anger and lots of affects going in this text to me that then makes sense, that this is about a discussion about painting, but it's also, a group of very specific New York people that are kind of having this disagreement with each other. There's also this thing where like Barbara Rose is someone who's coming directly from the Clement Greenberg tradition. So Michael Fried is the witness in her wedding marriage with Frank Stella. So they're part of this, abstract expressionist, formalist idea of painting, which is also something that Crimp is really against. So I just think it's interesting, this is not like an essay about the end of painting. This is like, it opens with like Barbara Rose, who's the art critic of Vogue, Vogue decided to write this, thing about art in this other magazine. So I think that kind of like, that's the tone of the whole thing, which I actually love personally. But.
I think that's for me, because when I first read this, so it's in October Journal, which if you've ever read, is like often very dense and very like psychoanalytically inflected and very heavy and very authoritative. And this has got elements of that, but it's also, when I first read it, I was like, it's a bit like quick, or like it doesn't really get into depth. It's like a polemic, but it doesn't really like, but then once we ended up reading Douglas Crimp's autobiography and other articles that he wrote, he curated a famous exhibition in 1977 called Pictures, which almost inaugurated what was called the Pictures generation of like American artists. People like Sherry Levine, Cindy Sherman, they weren't in that exhibition, but then he writes a kind of text in October.
And there's an amazing oral history. I think it's the Smithsonian's archive. It's like a 7-hour interview. And it's so good. It has like all the gossip about everybody in the art world since the 80s. It's really, really fun. It's really, really great. I just read like bits and chunks, but it's really...
And in a weird way, this, like The End of Painting is such a like crazy title maybe now. Maybe it didn't seem so crazy in 1989 or whatever. But it's such a like idea of like linear progress through like modernity, and they're going to like smash through into postmodernism or whatever, which is kind of what's happening in October Journal at that moment. They're trying to formulate this idea of what a postmodern art is, like what makes modernity, why is that over? Why is modernism over in art? But actually, I much prefer the version of it where it's just like someone having like a real dig at someone else that they know really well. But why is he having a dig at her? It's because she's curated that exhibition, right?
Well, she's having a go, but her main critique at the exhibition is Daniel Buren, right?
Oh,
and then,
okay.
Which is, again, like, first, so it's a Barbara Rose. So it's a quote, Crimp quoting Barbara Rose that he's critiquing. There's a lot of like big quotes of Barbara Rose in the essay. For some time, I have felt that the radicalism of minimal and conceptual art is fundamentally political, that its implicit aim is to discredit thoroughly the forms and institutions of dominant bourgeois culture.
But this is her basic critique of this show. What's it called? Eight contemporary artists. Is that it's too political. So the rest of that quote is good because it's like, whatever the outcome of such a strategy, one thing is certain: when an institution as prestigious as the Museum of Modern Art invites sabotage, it becomes party not to the promulgation of experimental art, but to the passive acceptance of disenchanted, demoralised artists' aggression against art greater than their own, which is a real diss. And then it gets into the critique of Daniel Buren. It's these stripes. It's always one colour stripe plus a white stripe or a transparent stripe. And sometimes they're on canvas, but sometimes they're, like affixed to bits of public space. And he calls them paintings, but they're always like staged or intervening in a space in a way that he kind of frames as political. So like there's one famous one. Oh, it's not going to work, which is a bit annoying. There's one famous one called Painting Sculpture. You know this one? The one that... And it's meant to be in a Guggenheim show. This is the one that Dan Flavin gets taken down.
Oh, yeah, so that's the one in 71.
Is that the set? Yeah. Okay, yeah. And it hangs... It's the Guggenheim, the big spiral museum in New York? And it hangs all the way down this central atrium, which is like, 6 floors or whatever. So it's this huge painting. And I didn't realise how big it was. So they spent days like putting it up. And then he goes and speaks to the press and makes a quite political statement about it. Anti-Vietnam War kind of stuff. And then through like some other artists in the show, like Dan Flavin, who's the like fluorescent light guy. Is that right? Yes. They get the painting taken down. The museum decides, this isn't for us. This is like too political. And Dan Flavin, like he brags about it in this letter that he writes to someone else. It's like really hardcore, like artists being really nasty to each other to like
But that's what I mean, that this is where, like, someone attacking an exhibition, attacking Daniel Buren in the exhibition, has a very specific meaning in the US at that moment.
Yeah.
Like, it's not any artist. It's like you're attacking Daniel Buren. It has like a very specific, that's why all the anger comes back.
Yeah. So then so I guess we should get to what he means by the end of painting. So Barbara Rose. So do you think Barbara Rose is like standing in for a certain kind of reactionary figure? Because she then curates an exhibition called like American Painting in the 80s. And that he has a dig at that as well. And basically says it's all reactionary. That's the like line of the essay, isn't it?
Okay, but if we take a step back of the Barbara Rose, I love the Barbara Rose and Crimp vibe, but I think going back to what the essay does, there's lots of really, like in the middle of this fight, there's lots of really interesting things that come from the essay, which is like this kind of questioning of painting as this kind of like eternal, always already structure. And so it has this, so what makes it possible to see a painting, which I think is really interesting. So Crimp, completely different lineage. So like if Barbara Rose, Clement Greenberg, they're all formalists, they're talking about, like abstract expressionism and paint, and Crimp is more like a Marxist lineage, and he's thinking about the conditions, and time, and everything is historically situated, which I think is really interesting. And he is a big fan of Wolfling, is that the right name to pronounce the art historian? And I read a lot of him when I was in MBA, and there's something really interesting that he says, which is he says that it's not only that the material conditions of production are historically situated, so it's not only that different things can be done at different times. That vision is historically situated, which I also always love, is like that what we can see is very specific for the time that we live. And I think that's where it comes here, like what makes it possible to see a painting. And that's what like Buren is. So when Daniel Buren is saying that is a painting, what he's saying is like we now live in the conditions that we live now, you can see that and see it as a painting. What does it mean to call that a painting? What makes it possible to see a painting as a painting, and to what end is painting under such conditions of its presentation? So he says, it is fundamental to Buren's work that it act in complicity with these very institutions that it seeks to make visible as the necessary conditions of the art for intelligibility. Crimp is saying, because Barbara Rose is saying, Daniel Buren wants to have it both ways. He wants to be very critical of these things, and he also wants to be inside these things, which I would say apply to most of us in the art world, to be fair. I think that comes with being an artist. You have like an existential crisis of like, but what Crimp is saying is that painting needs that. You know what I mean? That you have that painting, for a painting to be critical of painting, it has to be engaged with institutions that construct painting as a painting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that really, the bit where, like Barbara Rose, there's obviously a personal relationship there, but her version of painting, her vision of what painting is ahistorical, like universal, like always recognizable, like all these things that you're saying Crimp is into, she just hasn't thought about at all, or doesn't recognize at all. And so she becomes this quite useful figure for like the reactionary vision of painting, right? Which I think is really interesting. Like this is on page 75. For Rose, then, painting is a high art, a universal art, a liberal art, an art through which we can achieve transcendence and catharsis. Painting has an essence, and that essence is illusion, the capacity to materialize images rendered up by the boundless human imagination. Painting is a great unbroken tradition that encompasses the entire known history of man. Painting is above all human. And then 80. He's basically talking about this vision of the history of painting. What is it that makes it possible to look at a Paleolithic cave painting, a 17th century court portrait, an abstract expressionist canvas, and say that they are all the same thing, that they all belong to the same category of knowledge? How did this historicism of art get put in place? And I suppose what's interesting to think about is that he says it somewhere else, but he basically says that like the people who want painting to be that, people who want it to be like universal and like forever and ahistorical, they want to reinstate a very particular vision of painting, which is actually really historically located, right? I don't know, I guess a kind of 19th century vision of like modernist painting or something like that. And I actually ended up looking at, there was a Hal Foster takedown of the exhibition that Barbara Rose curated, and I don't know, it's interesting. It's interesting to think of them as like two competing like gangs, like art history gangs, that are having these little fights. But it results in essays like this, The End of Painting, that like, you know, that phrase, the death of painting or the end of painting, gets like bandied about quite a lot. But it's interesting to historically locate it between like, two very small groups of a set of people in the New York art world or something. So I wanted, because you said, I didn't realise that Frank Stella was Barbara Rose's husband, and he does not say that in this essay. But I really like, does everyone know Frank Stella's paintings? I can't Google stuff, which is a bit annoying. Anyway, Frank Stella, his paintings are basically kind of what inspired loads of other people to give up painting, which is a pretty...
You should show it on the PDF. You have it
is it on the PDF? Okay, cool. Which I think is such a weird legacy, isn't it? Like being the kind of painter that makes other people want to give up. All right, so this is like, I guess Douglas Crimp is using this piece, Point of Pines from 1959. No, is that right? Yeah, I think so. To epitomise like what he calls, I guess, the end of modernist painting, right? Like if abstraction in Greenbergian modernism is this thing that kind of goes down to like this point. And Frank Stella is being utilised here as like the end point of painting. Like he keeps quoting Ad Reinhardt, saying these are the last paintings that anyone can make. And then he shows, and then he's kind of has a dig at Frank Stella's late. So this is 1959, and then this is from 1978. Does anyone know his late work? It's absolutely amazing. I think it's brilliant. It's totally mad, and like it basically like it just is like, nah, I can't be bothered to do this hardcore like abstraction anymore, and just does this like insane. There's loads of like gestural paint work. And these are kind of relief things that come out from the wall, and they're all multicoloured. And like, I just think they're completely crazy. And I'm really interested in this idea of like late style, like what it means to kind of lose your inhibitions or something.
You're like approaching midlife crisis. You're like,
yeah, man.
This is it.
Well, I've always liked it because I've never been able to stick to like a thing. You know, some artists have a thing, right? Like I grew up in the YBA times, and like they all had their thing. Like, and the famous artists would have this thing that they'd keep doing. Right? Rachel Whitetreed, I'm going to do casts of things. I was like, I don't have a thing. But I like it in late style when everyone's just like making like mad stuff because they're basically retired. But it does make more sense that this is a particular dig at Frank Stella. But he says some interesting stuff about that as well. Here we go. Frank Stella's paintings in the 50s and 60s signalled to his colleagues that the end of painting had finally come. I'm thinking of such deserters of the ranks of painting as Dan Flavin, Donald Judd, Sol LeWitt and Robert Morris, I guess. It seems fairly clear that Stella's own career is a prolonged agony over the incontestable implications of those works, as he has retreated further and further away from them, repudiating them more vociferously with each new series. The late 70s paintings are truly hysterical in their defiance of the black paintings, which I think are those kind of hardcore abstract ones. Each one reads as a tantrum, shrieking and sputtering that the end of painting has not come. So it's this weird, like, I don't know, I mean, in the last podcast we looked at Gerhard Richter and Anselm Kiefer, and, excuse me, I told you that big lunch was going to repeat on us. I knew it.
It was a reaction to Kiefer.
Yeah, it was Kiefer, made me sick in my mouth, yeah. Gerhard Richter is, what? That's okay.
You'll be listening to the episode, you'll understand.
Yeah, listen to the episode. Gerhard Richter is positioned by Benjamin Buchloh as like the last painter, the only painter who can keep painting after the end of painting. Because he's like wallowing in the death of painting or something like that. So there is this like narrative that painting kind of dies, and then any other painting that happen is after that is kind of, you just have to reckon with that end over and over again. But I like, you know, if you read, instead of a critique, if you read this as like a positive description of the features of those paintings, I think it's absolutely spot on. I often think that about critiques, right? Like if you just, this is helpful as an individual artist, is that if you just reframe critique as just a really good description of the work, then it just like neutralizes it totally. Someone recently, I'm doing a PhD, and my supervisor, probably an important person to mention, they said that I'm letting tone do all the work, and that it's very unclear when I'm speaking in a voice of authority or when I'm speaking in the character of an imbecile who doesn't know what they're talking about.
And you were like, yes!
Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe that's just what I'll make my PhD about. And I think that's the same with those Frank Stella paintings. Like, it's totally true, or I feel like it's a really accurate take on these paintings, that they're like, there's someone just being like, what do I do after I've done that? Like, how do I go forward from that? So on an individual level, I think that really is like an accurate description of the career of like some of those kind of modernist painters.
But I'm going to go back. So there's some stuff that comes before the Frank Stella, which I think beyond the kind of like descriptions, I think there's lots of really kind of theoretical positions there.
Yeah.
And there's something that he says that is really interesting. So he's talking about like epistemology and ontology. And so he says, by modernism, we mean not only a canon of art, of works, but an entire epistemology of art. And he's talking about like art as being epistemological in the sense that art is always like invested in constructing and understanding, or proposing a way to understand and being in the world. And then he says somewhere, or like he kind of like, I don't know if he says it or he just gestures towards it, the idea that maybe painting is ontological instead of epistemological. And I think that's super interesting, because there's this whole thing that comes up, and you guys, a lot of you study painting, so maybe come up through you as well, but where I teach, people always say, there's art, and then there's painting. And painting is sort of like operating, they're connected, but painting is sort of operating in its own rules, like he's follow its own logic. It's almost like hard to, and I like the idea of like these two things being intentional. There's something about painting, and like Crimp makes fun of so many things that Barbara Rose said that I was reading, and I was like, that totally applied to know Davis and contemporary painting. He has a bit saying like, Barbara Rose is obsessed with like touch and painting as the labor, as the touch, and I'm like, yeah, I'm obsessed with that stuff too. Like I think that's fundamental to think about painting today, is the kind of the labor part of the painting and the human. There's lots of stuff there that is really, and he's saying, he's being quite critical about that, because it is a polemic, and he's making a point, he's so focused on the conceptualization and things like that. But I think there's something about, that's why painting does have this history that is universalizing and colonial and problematic, of saying like, humans have always been painting from the caves of Altamira until now, we all paint. And he's like, that is silly, those are different things. But at the same time, there's something there about ontological, about the gesture, and how painting is connected to this history of making a material, the human body making a material gesture in the world for others. That it is part of how we understand painting.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. I think I agree with that. I just think that it's really important to say that when he's saying that painting is ontological, he's saying that within Barbara Rose's idea of it, painting is ontological, and he, in this at least, he's fundamentally disagreeing with that.
Well, because he's saying art is epistemological, but I think he's saying that painting cannot be ontological, because he can only see painting as part of art. That's what Daniel Buren is a painting. You know what I mean? He's like inscribing painting in the larger conceptual world of painting at the time.
Yeah.
But Barbara Rose, like Clement Grunberg is saying, painting is painting.
But that's super interesting, because within Greenbergian formalism, painting, everything's subject specific in Greenbergian formalism, and painting has to be about painting, sculpture has to be about sculpture. But they're still like ranking the arts, right? So sculpture is what you back up into while you're trying to get a better look at the painting. That's the line, isn't it? Do you remember this?
But that is not from Greenberg.
It's not from Greenberg.
Yeah.
But is that from Fried or?
No, it's from an artist.
Okay. Anyway, it's like it's a good vision of the hierarchy, right? So painting is like the highest.
I don't even know if that guy is Greenberg or no.
Let's just say he is. I think it is. We've done a lot of these episodes now, so I sometimes get confused between the different essays. But the point being that it is this weird back and forth. So like, the whole point is that in the 60s and 70s, loads of people are giving up painting. They are painters, but they're like, there's no point in painting anymore. I need to go into another medium to do something. But that's within a modernist conception of subject specificity, where like, to be a painter is to be a painter, and not just to be an artist, right? Like so it is important to locate, like, where does this contemporary idea of like people being artists who then go out and do a specific thing? Like, I'm a sculptor, but I do some performance and I do like sound and things like that. That idea is historically located in this very particular moment in the 60s and 70s in Western contemporary art, where like painting and art kind of do split off. Because all the people who give up painting, they don't give up painting for sculpture or for performance, they give up painting to make art, which is such a weird idea, right? But that is the way it's kind of formulated at that time, is that there's this kind of split. And that's what that's what we're kind of trying to grapple with over this episode and the last one. Is like, what does it mean to paint under the regime of contemporary art, when contemporary art, historically speaking, has kind of located itself as like a rejection of painting as a certain kind of, I don't know, like modernist high point or something. But it's just a bit of a dead end question.
But that's what I like. That's what I like, the epistemological and ontological differentiation, because I think then it kind of like brings a tension between those two things.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is, in terms of the text as well, it's like, and this is something that comes up a lot when we read stuff, is like, this is such a specific genealogy, right? This is like like a US, European, October magazine, art market world genealogy. This is not, painting contain multitudes, and it's happening all over the place with like lots of different like meanings and ways of circulations and stuff. And I think this is a very linear narrative.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's what's weird about October at this time, is they are really trying to like do a very particular job. Rosalind Krauss, 2 years before this, publishes Sculpture in the Expanded Field, which is a different kind of piece, but is doing the same thing of like, sculpture has kind of expanded. There isn't one kind of sculpture. There are these different kinds of sculpture, and this is the advent of something that is after modernism. And I think she uses the word postmodernism in that article, which is one of the early uses of that phrase in relation to art. And so it is happening, like this very specific place, this very specific time, this very specific set of people are doing this very specific job, which ends up informing these kind of like big, grand narrative categories of, I don't know, modernism and postmodernism in art and stuff. I ended up reading another, I won't talk about it now, maybe we'll go to Noah Davis, and then I ended up reading another Crimp piece, which is about this pictures, and he published a version of the catalogue essay in October, and it's about the return to making pictures of stuff. Like, what is it to go back to, he doesn't use the word representation, but that would be the kind of quick and easy way to say it. What is it to go back to representation after this moment where kind of people are giving up painting, returning to painting, like rejecting these universal categories, trying to create these universal categories. But I want to talk about it in terms of Noah Davis, because I think it's really interesting a lot of our episodes in this series on painting have been about that thing of like touch and the very specific gestural and like physical qualities of paint, that as we're not painters, so we don't like get that on like a haptic level. But we've been looking closely a lot of painting to kind of appreciate that. But I do wonder whether Noah Davis, if only discussed in those terms, is being reduced somewhat. And actually, weirdly, obviously Noah Davis isn't mentioned at all in any of these essays by Crimp, but the pictures essay gave me another way to think about the work that he's doing in some of those paintings. Have you got any more on end of painting, or should we move on?
No, we can move.
Okay.
So I think there's something really interesting. So I was just right at the beginning. But because we're an art school, and Noah Davis got accepted into Cooper Union. At the time, Cooper Union was like, I don't know, it's like living here and being accepted at the Royal Academy, right? It was like free, it was like amazing. He got into he sent like a notebook, and just with the notebook he was accepted, and then he quit. And he always complains about it. He always complains. I read like the 3 or 4 recording. And he complains about it because he said it's really hard to be a painter at our school, because Cooper Union was so focused on making his work conceptual. And he's like, my work is not conceptual, I'm a painter. And I think that's really interesting, because he repeats this over and over. And one of the things that you said, you stop painting and you do all these things because you become an artist. And I think there's something really interesting about painters, because most painters they're like, I'm a painter. Yeah. There's no like, I left all these things and I'm an artist. It's like, no, I'm a painter. And Noah Davis does amazing stuff. He said it. He does like sculpture. He does like, he's part of this group collective. He does graffiti. He does collages. He does a museum. And he's like, I'm a painter. I'm a painter who does all that stuff. I'm not an artist who paints. And I think there's something really, like so many of the things that Crimp is complaining here, like Crimp is like, oh, Barbara Rose is like, oh, people believe in painting. She's like, I believe in painting. And I was like just marking how many times Noah Davis says, I believe in painting.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like, I'm a painter and I believe in painting.
In the interviews you're talking
about. Yeah,
okay.
So there's something really interesting in that tension, because on the other hand, this is so different from like, Frank Stella, right? Like this is a completely different, and like, his images are super political and sophisticated, they're doing all these other.
So, these are a different set of texts, and I didn't get as many quotes from these, But do you want to do it just by quotes as per normal?
Yeah. So I have from the introduction, right?
Yeah.
So I have Noah was deep DNA truth of Noah was that he was first and foremost a painter. His painters are both figurative and abstract, realist and dreamlike. A master of sophisticated compositions, had a knack for establishing three-dimensional space while remaining highly attuned to the flatness of the canvas. His paint application is dry, Rothko-like, in that the pigment appears to be mixed with as little medium as technically possible. His figures often seem to float, as if nimbus. They are in the picture, but not tethered away to it by gravity. Look carefully, and you see there is rarely a pool of shadow to indicate weight to the feet of his figures. So there's something that comes a lot when, like, Helen Molesworth, who's a critic who has also written for October, but he's like the generation after those people. So she always talks about the void, and so there's a lot of like these sort of spaces. There's a lot of like kind of black, empty spaces. There's a lot of so she talks a lot about like this painting. For example, this is like a very small painting on Noah Davis' son, and like this decision of how black the windows, that there's no landscape. It's like his characters are always escaping towards a void.
There's lots about the kind of solitude of the figures, right? Like how even when there are multiple figures in the frame, they're not necessarily looking at each other, or they're kind of separated. There's a good little bit on the picture of the two women on the sofa and how they're turned away from each other, and there's this kind of like, she talks a lot about this, she calls it a seam between the two women, this thing that connects them but also divides them.
But I think to me, what's interesting there is that, because it was something that we kind of like started talking when we arrived, which was this idea that how can we think about the Douglas Crimp essay and the end of painting, to me, and I think maybe I'd like to hear what you think about that, but it is a call to like replace painting in the specific. So, you know, it's coming from like the abstract expressionism, which is so politically specific, right? Like if you look at the history of abstract expressionism, it's not about like human expression, you know, it's about a very specific economical and political moment and like a male subject. There's like a lot of stuff that is happening there. But what I think the end of painting is saying is like, yes, or not, maybe like not, maybe he's saying, why is painting not specific? You know what I mean? Like that painting after those things, we do need to understand the painting as an object that is part of his history, of his genealogy, of all these different things. Like, not in a sense that, and again, he leaves corporate union because it's not like in a shallow conceptualist way, but in a way like, you know, like this is a work that it is painting. It's also super political. It's like technically so sophisticated as painting. And I think he's such an interesting person, and he, you know, you see his influence, and I see a lot of like Marlene Dumas there, and a lot of like Luc Tuymans, and he's part of like a specific genealogy of painting, and he's obsessed with technique, and he's obsessed with skill, and he's obsessed with like craft and the history of composition. So, you know, there's the door, there's like a Renaissance reference and all these things. It's also work about like blackness, normality. Like that's the thing that he's openly more interested in. Is like, I want to represent black people living normal lives in these normal moments and not being like political representative. And there's like a lot of racial politics there, and there's a lot of, you know, his relation to the community, and there's a lot about like his relation to the art market. So he paints his paintings and then he repaints most of them. So most of these canvases have been painted like over and over because he's like either broke and has no money to buy some new canvas, or he has decided after, when he does have money, that actually he doesn't like the idea of like keeping these things and fetishizing it, you know, like he's destroying them. So that painting, it might look like it's just figure making, or like it might look like, or like it might be about like the touch and the gesture and the kind of like this human thing, but it is also about all these other things.
So the thing, sorry, I'm just keep getting up and sitting down, but the thing I want to say was that I don't know Noah Davis's work that well, but we were talking about like who isn't part of that history of abstract expressionism, high modernism, that like linear progression through modernism. And I suppose the point you're making about like representing black normalcy, like that is not in any history of painting, like, you know, canvas, easel painting, whatever, that Crimp can refer to. Like, there's no way to talk about that because it is not something that has been brought into the museum, should we shut that door? Sorry. It's just someone hitting a bit of wood over and over again. That's what I would have been doing at art school. That would have been my life. performance practice or something.
During the lectures, that's so you.
Like in the thing. And so I think that's still really important. But I think what is interesting to me is, and a painter we looked at early on in this series was Philip Guston, right? Who literally, he like lives this linear thing where like, he's like, I mean, in the kind of simple narrative of his career as an artist, he like goes into, he's associated with the New York school, with the abstract expressionists, and then he kind of rejects it all and like returns, I'm doing, for the podcast listeners, I'm doing air quotes, he rejects it all and returns to like figuration. If you know Philip Guston's late works, all these kind of mad cartoonish like Ku Klux Klan and like horrible artist figures, like grisly bits of hands and feet and boots everywhere. And I think the word pictures is really interesting because Guston uses that word. And a lot of American painters use that word. But I think Guston uses it to like capture the fact that like art history, like this idea of like painting and art can never capture all of the reasons why you end up making pictures or like whatever, small a art, like the things you want to make. I think that's really interesting. And then, so when I read this Douglas Crimp essay on pictures, which is very theoretical, it's about like, I guess, a media saturated world and how when you're making pictures in the 20th century, he's talking about the kind of 70s, you're not necessarily making a picture of the thing that your picture pictures. You're kind of making a picture of pictures. Because when people look at your picture, they're not necessarily going to think about what you have pictured. They're going to think about all the other kind of pictures they've seen that look a bit like that picture. And I thought that was interesting in terms of Noah Davis's, because it has got this mixture. Helen Molesworth writes, I think it's Helen Molesworth says, he does two kinds of pictures. So he does this kind of picture, which do look like kind of, maybe they're photos of like, you know, domestic scenes or scenes that he has witnessed. Or I know there's a series of paintings made from photos taken in a swimming pool in the 1970s that are really great and are clearly kind of, I don't know, like paintings from specific photos. And then
these are often photos. His paintings are often photos.
No, I know. Sorry, I mean, so the
those
other
are from his mum's photos.
They're his mum's photos, but also they are paintings of those exact photos. But then there's these other kinds of paintings which I'm going to now struggle to find, aren't I? But any of the ones that have like the ballet in the outside the projects one, like the kind of, she calls them magical realist. Yeah, like that one with the wings or something.
See, but this is a photo. This is a photo that he took of his. This is Koran. This is his wife.
So okay, so maybe this isn't even the right example. But there's lots of pictures where they are invented scenes, right?
This is the one.
Okay, yeah, that's a very good example. Where like that is clearly not a real scene. And what am I trying to say here? I've like lost the thread now because we're talking about the different scenes. Anyway, I don't know, I've just completely lost it. Oh, pictures of pictures, yeah. And Crimp does this interesting thing where he links it back to like an earlier bit of modernism, of surrealism, of imagism, and various kind of symbolist ideas of early modernism. And I think he talks about like a tropological way of reading paintings, which is a kind of like, where you're not necessarily like trying to work out what the picture is of, but you're kind of thinking through the associations of, you know, I think that's like a Cartier bracelet or something, right? Who knew that? Someone knew that. And I did not know that. And like there's just like Helen Molesworth, when she's talking about this painting in the video, you know, you can't even work out what that thing is on the guy's head. It's like, is it a bucket or a kind of enlarged cup or something? Your job isn't to work out like a narrative or a relationship between these figures that's kind of outside of the painting. Like, I don't know, it just seemed helpful for me to think about that. Outside of questions of like paint application and I guess kind of black representation, which are obviously important features of Noah Davis's like paintings and what he's doing in the paintings, as well as his work in, you know, running the Underground Museum and stuff like that. I don't know where I was going with that, sorry, because I kind of lost my thread. But it was interesting to think of like different ways of talking about this painting. I mean, I felt like the video, basically I thought the video was great. The Helen Molesworth video where she talks about individual paintings was great. But then I didn't get loads from the other Helen Molesworth texts that we kind of selected in the end. I got a sense of his life and his career and how painting slotted in alongside other stuff. But it was only when she spoke in quite a lot of detail about the paintings, like standing in front of them, that I kind of started enjoying the works, like, I don't know, on their own terms or something? But I know you read a lot more of the interviews and stuff like that, so.
Yeah, but most of the interviews, I think I'll mark something here as like I wrote like feminist pedagogy. So there's something that like Helen Molesworth does all the time, and she does it in the video, which is she's like, we must do the collective work of making sense of them, looking, thinking, and talking about them. And that is something that I think was important for her to start this part of the series, and that we come back to it, which is like, it's really hard to find good writing about painting. Like painting is really, really hard to write about. And you can all disagree with me, I don't know. But to me, there's something about painting that is specifically escaping language. And there's something that Noah Davis will say as well when he does the lecture. He's like, I paint so I don't have to talk about these things. I paint because there's this other way in which I think and I express my thinking that is not language. So I'm always really interested in like the difficulty to hold that space, to have. And that happens a lot. So Noah Davis did this amazing project called the Underground Museum, which is worth looking at. Which is this museum like this in his neighborhood it's in the small book, in Los Angeles. And he gets some money from his dad when his dad passed away, and then him and his partner and his brother Khalil Joseph, who is an amazing filmmaker, has a film now called Black News that is out and is completely worth watching. But they use this money to make this museum, and the first exhibition they do is they copy. So Matt was talking about Dan Flaving. So they go to a lot of museums and say, we want, art in our neighborhood because we think art should be part of everybody's everyday life. And the museums are like, yeah, right, whatever. So they kind of make copies of all these works. So this is a Crystal, this is a Duchamp, this is a Dan Flaving, Onkawara, Jeff Koons, Robert Morris. We're very big fans of Robert Morris. Donald Judd-Barr. And then he starts making the shows. And then when you read the interviews and the text, it's almost like immediately like everybody just goes and talk about those things because it's so easy to talk about those things. Yeah. It's so easy to talk about conceptual art. And it's so easy to talk about sculpture. And you can see the relief. You're like, oh yeah, he did these paintings, they're amazing. And he did these sculptures. And then you go on about it.
Well, in a way, like obviously these do exist as a series of artworks that are in exhibitions, but ultimately they exist as like a story or an anecdote, right? That you can retell to kind of show what kind of person Noah Davis was and what the Underground Museum is trying to do. So it exists in language, which is not actually true of the works themselves. Maybe not Duchamp, but but that is totally true about paintings.
And there's something. So I think there's something about. She says in the video as well. She's like, I don't know how to talk about this. We need to figure out how to talk about this work together. And he's someone who passed away really young, so there's not much written about it.
Yeah.
I thought, those are his mom's photos. There's something really, I just thought there's something really lovely about that proposition in relation to painting. That painting is something that always already forces us to think and make meaning together in that space. Maybe that there's something quite embodied in the way that we understand it, or like that we kind of like, that is not a cohesive understanding because it goes through all these different subjectivities we have to all hold on and be there together and kind of experience this thing together. And I was thinking he has this lecture from the Corcoran, I think it's the only lecture that exists of him, the Corcoran School of Art in the US. And it's really interesting because it's with a lot of like art teachers, and the art teachers are obsessed with the art market, but they're also like, she's like, oh, I don't know how to talk about my painting. And then the whole thing becomes a self-help session when they're like, oh, don't feel bad, your paintings are, you can do it. And like he's already like making so much money with his paintings, like a very, very successful. He's in this massive exhibition. And there's something really interesting, fascinating about the dynamic. But it's because it's this whole room of people, and he's saying like, it's hard to talk about painting, and everybody's so uncomfortable in the room because no one really know how to talk about the painting. So they keep like finding ways to escape and talk about the things around it. Yeah. And he talks about what he wants for his paintings. I think I wrote it somewhere that he was seeing like a lot at the time. So this is like early 2000s. He was seeing a lot of works that were antagonistic to the viewer, and he wanted to use painting to have a voice, to have people that he thought he could get people to engage with painting the way that wanted, which is like to people to live with this sense of meaning that he didn't have to, that is a different, it's almost something that is like passes through affect, but that doesn't mean that it's not intentional or that it's not sophisticated, but it's a different type of like knowledge or experience or shared experience. And I went to the Open City Festival this weekend, and Onyanka Iwe was talking about her films, which are also really conceptual, but they're experimental film. I think experimental film to me has something to related to painting the same way that is experimental film by definition is like refusing language. And she was talking about the work and she was saying, I just want people to live with this meaning, but I can't explain it. Like I can't tell you what the meaning is because the meaning is the thing that you get when you experience the work. I just love this tension of this struggle. You know, I mean, to have something like, I love Helen Molesworth, she's one of my favorite critics, and she just repeats this over and over. Like, I don't know, she worked with him, you know, they organized things together, she created this exhibition, and she's like, I don't know how to talk about this work. Like this.
She does say that, but she's quite good at talking about it.
But in a very different depth. See, I disagree. I think she's good at describing it. She's very good at describing, but she's not really contextualizing the work in the way that she would like historicize or contextualize other painters' works or other artists' works. It's very different. Like the way she's writing about Robert Gober is very different from the way she's talking about Noah Davis.
But I think that's fair enough because she's, you know, the start of in the video at least, the way she phrases that thing, that she does do the same thing in the video. It's because it's the moment from then. It's like the show that's at David's Werner, that then there's the show at the Barbican that was last year that came from the...
It's the same show.
The David's Werner show went to Barbican.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's this
So
show.
there you go.
Sorry,
yeah.
it's this show. It was like a variation of this show.
That is the beginning of the historicisation of that work, right? So like, as an art historian, she can't talk about it, but I think she does an amazing job of like really looking hard at the paintings and trying to put into language what the experience of looking at those paintings like, which I think is different from describing. And I also think that like, it's okay to say that you're not very good at talking about, or that you can't get at certain elements of your own work. But I am interested in, I really love it when artists know which bits of the work they can talk about and talk about those bits. So I haven't seen Noah Davis talk, I didn't watch that lecture. But I imagine there are parts of the work that he can talk about. And I don't know, I think this thing, like obviously lots of art escapes language, but like the bits that don't can be talked about.
I think painting escapes language. I think painting escapes language in a specific way. That is different from other types, and it goes back to this difference between the ontological and the epistemological. I do think.
I don't think painting is ontological then.
Sorry,
I'm with like the 1981 Crimp on this. I don't think it is. I think
so. How do you think it like situates in relation to the other?
I just think the notion that we would be able to distinguish what is historically located and what is like more fundamental than that, I think is a fantasy.
Oh no, I'm 100% a Marxist. Marxist art history all the way. Like that's not my disagreement. I still think it's historic. I think everything is historically situated.
So then, what do you think is ontological about painting?
I think it's intention, the way it is constructed and navigates. It's not engaging with a production of knowledge in the same way that I think the rest of contemporary art is.
Do you think it's?
But also, I just thought about this today, so I'm not sure I'm going to feel like that in 2 hours. But I think there's something there.
Because obviously, you know,
I've been to a lot of like things lately. Where, like I just did this lecture with someone who's an art critic who works who teaches near Chelsea, and she was like, talking to students. She was like, I can talk to you guys all about the art. They're really into like the art market in contemporary world. I can talk, and then there's painting, and like these two things are different. And they were like, I cannot talk about that, and I cannot talk about painting. Like painting is doing something else, is navigating the world in a different way. And like I do get it when people say that, and I think that was one of our challenges to decide to do this series because painting is. And it's always really terrifying when you're not room full of painters, and you're all like, oh my God, why are these people talking about painting? You guys don't understand anything. Which is absolutely fair enough.
I wanted to overcome that split, not reinforce it. That was my hope for the podcast. I don't know. I did a studio visit with someone who's making sculptures now. And he said, oh, well, I used to paint and now I do sculpture. And I said something about colour and stuff. And he was like, oh, well, I wasn't a proper painter. And it was like, yeah, he had that split in his head, even though he'd been doing it for years. And then he's now doing other things. But I think I don't know.
I love the split.
You love the split?
I love the split, yeah.
I don't know.
It's because I love an argument.
Yeah. I like the idea that people have different kinds of knowledge that are like untranslatable, and sometimes it's impossible to communicate. But I should be able to look at a painting, shouldn't I?
Yes, you are. That's the whole point. That's not.
Should I be able to make a painting?
I mean, I think other painters should tell you about that.
You guys can decide. I don't know.
But yeah, she has this thing. I don't know. Molesworth repeated in some of the she has 2 podcasts on Noah Davis, but she has this thing where like she's like talking to Noah Davis, and she's like she has to write this catalog essay because she curated this Carrie James Marshall exhibition, and she's really stressed about it. And she talks to Noah, and Noah was like, "Oh, Carrie James Marshall, the work speaks for itself." And Helen Molesworth is like, "No, I need to speak for the work because I'm a critic." The work.
I think that's...
And he's like, no, the work is... Why would you write about Carrie James Marshall? Just look at the paintings. Like, you don't have to write about it. Like, I love, those little...
I think that's... I just fundamentally want to read Helen Molesworth's article on that. Like, I can see the point. But, like, I'm just thinking about... a really good example of this is she's talking about the Pueblo series, which are all based on the South Central housing development by the African-American architect Paul Williams. Now... And Noah Davis is really interested in, she says, obsessed with Paul Williams. And there's like various paintings that include Paul Williams' architecture. And it's really like, you don't have to write about the paintings to write about that. But that really helps me look at the paintings, you know? And so, I don't know, I don't think you have to talk about like the meaning of the painting, because I think that's maybe like doesn't mean anything. You know, it doesn't, you can know this knowledge and then put it aside when you're looking at the paintings. But to me, like, it seems obvious that the things that can be captured in language, i.e. that Paul Williams was an African-American architect in the early 20th century who designed all these different kinds of buildings, including housing developments in LA. Like, knowing that is really helpful to my experience of looking at the painting, especially as like a British white guy who like doesn't already know who Paul Williams is. So I just think like,
but I'm not saying no.
No, I know you're not, but I don't know who I'm arguing against, but I am arguing. I don't know. I think I'm arguing against painters being able to say, like, I can't talk about the painting. It's like, you don't have to talk about, no one is talking about the meaning of their art. And when people think they're talking about the meaning of their art, they're mistaken. But they can talk about, like, the stuff they use to make the painting and, like, I don't know. Does that make sense?
But I think it's a different argument. I think it's like, I'm not...
Who am I arguing against?
Strong version of myself.
Yeah, exactly, probably.
Strong version of no, so it's not that. I think like, I read all this stuff and it's all super interesting. Like these books have tons of like interviews with like different artists, and it has like, this one has amazing people, like has like Tina Camp, which is an amazing theorist who wrote this book about listening to pictures. Everybody should read it. It's like an amazing theorist. It has like a text by Claudia Rankine. It has like an amazing, it has like a text from T.J. Clark, which was very surprising about the kind of architecture, the housing side. I'm not saying all of you should go do your paintings and never do anything else. You know what I mean? And I think, again, like Noah Davis he's a massive nerd. Like I'm saying that with all love. I think all artists are nerds. Sorry, sometimes I say that and people are like, oh, no, I think that's good. I think we're all obsessive nerds about stuff that no one else gets except us, like us as individuals. But I just love that, and this is what I love Helen Molesworth think about collective meaning making, that there's these things that make this obvious that all you can do is like go around them and try to grab them, and you can never properly grab them in a way that maybe like other types of art practices can be written in a press release, and you can kind of like, you can give them a form and you can hold them. And it's not like they can be reduced to language. Yeah, okay. But you can give them a form that holds them, and this is all these different texts escaping it. It was so hard to find, all these different things. And I was like, oh my God, Claudia Rankine wrote about his work. That's going to be amazing. And it is an amazing text, but it's an amazing text that is not about, the work necessarily. It's about like all these things around the work and all the kind of like community. That there's all these other things that exist in his practice. I'd be interested to read the T.J. Clark one, just because he has written so much about looking at paintings for like long times, right? Like The Sight of Death is just him looking at these 2 paintings for like 3 months or something. Or his writing on Heaven and Hell, on the Bosch paintings of, where the meaning cannot be got back to because it's too far in the past, or even the kind of morality of a painting by Bosch can't be like, you can't really return to it. You can like describe the historical context, but to like look at that painting now is so different. But that is interesting. I don't know what. I'd be interested to read that. Anything else? I have one more, which is something that Helen Molesworth says a few times. I think she said it in the film as well. She talks about Gestalt. She says that nowadays these paintings, they have this trap, which is that you look at them and then you're like, oh, I got this. You look at like, I don't know, for example, this, and you're like, I got it. It's like the building, the ballerinas, the image. You know what I mean? When they show us at the Barbican, this was poster all over the tube and stuff, and you're like, I got it. And she compares that to Toni Morrison's work in like storytelling. She's like, this is just like a narrative, and I can describe this scene, and then I got it. And then she's like, and then you spend time with it, and then you realize like the purple of the sky, and you realize then like the kind of all the stuff that is happening in terms of like painting and the use of space and the technique and the choice of pigment and all these things, and it's like a world to spend, all this time on. But it has like, that is a word that carries this tension between like looking very easy and figurative and kind of like accessible at the front, but carries like this depth and sophistication. And I think that's one of the things that she finds really hard to write about, because it's so easy to stay in the surface of it.
Maybe there's something about...
And I love that.
Yeah, but maybe there's something there where like everyone has to always respond to this. Maybe that's it. Everyone always has to like respond to this vision of painting as the art form that everyone gets. That you can get just by looking at it for a second and then you get it. Like this Barbara Rose vision of painting is like, oh, you just get it because it's an ontological category, it's a universal thing, it's every time we make a mark, we make a painting or whatever. Maybe that's the bit that like painters are also responding to when they're saying like, oh, I don't know how to talk about my work because there's something more going on than that. I don't know. Maybe other art forms don't have to respond to those kind of reactionary visions of what painting is. But to me that seems like obvious that you have to look at something for longer than... Anyway, okay. All right, cool. Is that enough?
I think so.
Thanks. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks again to Andrea, as always. Thanks to everyone at City and Guilds. It was great to be there. And thank you to you for listening and liking and subscribing and commenting and rating and so on, all of those things that I have to ask you to do. All right, next episode I think is going to be on Andean painting or Peruvian painting, but you'll have to look out for that. Remember to send this on to a friend who loves painting, and we'll see you for the next episode. Bye.